You see New York from our point of view. From the World Trade Center observation deck, the highest in the city, the highest outdoor deck in the world. Explore 3 states as the city comes to light. Come, spend a sunset on top of the world and see New York from our point of view.
When they were first constructed, many looked at the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and saw them as nothing more than 2 ugly boxes in the New York skyline. They got all the negative statements. Oversized filing cabinets, 2 packs of staple pins, the boxes in which the Empire State and Chrysler buildings were shipped in. But what Minoru Yamasaki had created was nothing short of an engineering marvel, far greater than anything that I am capable of explaining. And for nearly 30 years, they dominated the skyline of the Big Apple. In many ways, their simplicity was what made them stand out. They were in a strange but subtle way, a work of art. And while at the end of the day, they were just buildings, whose loss pales in comparison to the many lost within them that dark day in September of 2001, it would be a lie to say that the Twin Towers' demise was, in a way, the loss of a unique and never-to-be-repeated work of art. But within the 16-acre complex that once was the World Trade Center, there was more than just the Twin Towers to behold. Art was all around, easy to spot by even the ones who were not actively seeking it. The World Trade Center was as much a hub of art as it was a business and commerce. And at the base of the complex lay 7 works of art, each with their own unique look, meaning, and story to tell. Some were inspired by the very city they were within. Others were reminders of past events. And while each of these pieces no longer remains in the same state that they were when they were first built, some fared better than others. These 7 works of art were seen by many in their time, and though most today are a slowly forgotten memory, others have taken on a life greater than what the artist behind them envisioned. These are the 7 lost works of art of the World Trade Center. Now, when I say lost art, I'm referring to the lost public art that could be found within the lobbies of the Twin Towers and mainly the Austin J. Tobin Plaza at the foot of the complex. Not the privately held art within the center, which was owned by the various companies that called the complex home. The number of works of art in that regard is unknowable. From various sources, there were thousands of works of art held at the World Trade Center. For example, according to an article by The Economist in 2001, Citigroup alone lost over 1,100 works of art that they held within the Trade Center. Bank of America lost over 100. Estimates of the value of private art lost is about $100 million, but even that is likely not the full value of the art, as much of the private work within the Trade Center was not fully insured. But what I'm interested in is the $10 million in public works of art that was lost. These were the artwork that the Port Authority of New York allocated 1% of the World Trade Center's construction costs to commission and install in the complex. These pieces stood within the plaza and were admired by many for decades. We start with the oldest piece of art of the 7 that we will focus on in this video: the bent propeller. The bent propeller, also known as the World Trade Center Sable, or the cockeyed propeller, was created by artist Alexander Calder. At 25 feet or 7.62 meters, the piece was commissioned in 1969 and completed in 1970 while the World Trade Center was still being constructed. Easy to identify by its striking red color, this piece had a very interesting life of being moved around from one location to another. It was originally located at the entrance of the North Tower, aka the original One World Trade Center, on West Street. However, following the opening of Battery Park, it was moved to Vesey and Church Street, and then finally moved onto a footbridge that connected the complex with the then newly completed 7 World Trade Center. While it was called the Bent Propeller, it more so resembled 3 boomerangs if one looked at it long enough. The propeller stood for 31 years, before it was buried under the rubble of the collapsing towers around it. Following the attacks, those close to the late Calder, including his grandson, set out to try and find the bent propeller in order to restore it to its former glory. Following the end of search efforts for survivors, the hunt for the propeller officially began, with flyers being passed around to workers to inform them of what to look for, with emphasis being put on protecting a, quote, famous American sculpture. Eventually, parts of the propeller were found. According to Alexander Rohr, quote, this was October 11th. The steel was still red hot, which was shocking to me. The heat, the intensity of that devastation was so incredible. Most of the red paint had been scorched off the piece, but nonetheless, the bent propeller had been found in some form. In all, about 40% of the propeller was recovered, but what was found was too damaged to be restored. Most of the pieces are now held in storage by the Calder Foundation. Eventually though, a portion of the sculpture was donated to the September 11th Museum, where it is on display today, rusted and mangled, almost unrecognizable to what it once was in its prime. Moving on now to arguably the most well-known public art in the World Trade Center complex, the Sphere. Since the towers fell, the Sphere has taken on a life that its creator, the late artist Fritz Koenig, never imagined it would when he first was commissioned to create it in 1967 by the Twin Towers designer, Minoru Yamasaki. A fan of his work, Koenig eventually was awarded the contract and was commissioned to build what would be the centerpiece of the World Trade Center complex. What he created was something unique and almost hard to describe by someone like me who isn't as artistically knowledgeable. Some look at it and see a globe, others see a head with a helmet on, and others see a cyclops. Similar in height to the bent propeller at 25 feet or 7.62 meters, with a diameter of 17 feet or 5.2 meters, the Sphere sat in the middle of a fountain which, in itself, sat within the middle of the Austin J. Tobin Plaza, named after the director of the Port Authority of New York who authorized the complex's construction. When the Sphere was completed in 1971, it was the largest bronze sculpture of modern art ever made. Koenig even called it his, quote, biggest child. The sculpture was dedicated to world peace through trade, which was in turn the theme behind the World Trade Center. Peace through commerce. Sadly, peace is now no longer what the World Trade Center is remembered for. Instead, as a starting point for much of the conflict and loss we continue to see today. But through the dust and rubble of Ground Zero, the Sphere proved that the Trade Center's goal of peace was not lost with their fall. Miraculously, despite being literally at the center of it all, the bronze sculpture survived virtually intact. It was dented, ripped up, and filled with debris, but still recognizable for what it was. The Sphere was eventually dismantled and sent into storage. But the fact it had survived was what essentially was pure devastation, made many see it no longer as a work of art, but as a symbol and memorial. A symbol of resilience and survival, and a memorial to all that was lost. The piece was eventually put on display in Battery Park in March of 2002. There it would stand for the next 15 years until 2017. By that point, Battery Park no longer wanted the sphere, nor did the September 11 memorial. But the Port Authority of New York wanted to return it to its home, where it had originally stood for 30 years. And following a campaign to repatriate it, the sphere finally returned back home to the World Trade Center. Today it is located at Liberty Park, which is located at the Trade Center site. Battered and scarred, the sphere now rests peacefully back in the same place it once proudly stood in for decades. Though instead of being a symbol of peace through trade, it is now a memorial and reminder of humanity at its darkest. Fritz Koenig died in 2017, before the sphere was formally returned to the Trade Center, sadly. But he has stated this in regards to the sphere's new meaning. Quote, "Now she has a different beauty, one that I could never imagine. She now has her own life, different from the one that I gave her. It was a sculpture. Now, it's a memorial." Located at the Church Street entrance to the complex, between buildings 4 and 5 of the Trade Center, lay the third sculpture. Officially known as the World Trade Center Plaza sculpture, it was also known as Cloud Fortress. With a dimension of 4.3 by 10 by 5.2 meters, or 14 by 34 by 17 feet, Cloud Fortress was completed in 1972 by artist Masayuki Nagare. The sculpture depicted two pyramids attached by their base and tilted slightly upwards. While at first glance, the sculpture appears solid, in reality, it was a veneer of black Swedish granite over an armature of steel and concrete. When the towers fell, Cloud Fortress survived. However, the sculpture would later be destroyed during emergency efforts in clearing Ground Zero, and to provide stable ground for machinery being brought in. No traces of Cloud Fortress were ever found at the Fresh Kills landfill, where all the debris was taken. Masayuki Nagare, who was still alive at the time, was watching the attacks unfold on TV live and described it as the start of a terrible age. A veteran of World War II, who served in the Imperial Japanese Navy before his art career, he had lived through enough ages to know when a bad one was about to begin. When asked about what he felt about his most famous work of art being destroyed, according to an article on the Japanese Times, he simply smiled and said, quote, "I guess the sculpture has itself turned into a memory now." And in a way, he was right. The sculpture really did live up to its name. It endured the destruction like a fortress, but then vanished like a cloud. A memory of a bygone era and of a lost location. The next lost work of art is also the first one for which the fate remains somewhat unknown, though it is pretty safe to assume in regards to what happened to it. Located in between the Twin Towers and in front of the Marriott World Trade Center Hotel, also known as 3 World Trade Center, lay the Ideogram. With a dimension of 7.2 by 5.9 by 8.7 meters, or 23.5 by 19.5 by 28.5 feet, this stainless steel sculpture was created by artist James Rosati. Like most artwork in the Austin J. Tobin Plaza, he was commissioned to create it in 1969, completing the piece in 1972, just before the complex opened. According to jamesrosati.org, prior to the sculpture being installed in the plaza, it underwent wind tunnel testing, likely due to the strong gusts of wind that would be present between the towers. Exactly what Ideogram was supposed to be, I've got no clue. It's more of an abstract looking art, if you were to ask me. As you moved around the complex, its shape would change. From some angles, it looked like an upside down trapezoid, while other angles made it look like a park bench. Either way, for nearly 30 years, it sat in between the Twin Towers, seen by employees and tourists alike. Exactly what happened to Ideogram after the towers fell remains a mystery. But given how close it was to buildings, it's almost certain it was destroyed. No pieces of it were ever recovered. Due to the sculpture being made of stainless steel, its remains would look no different to any piece of the Twin Towers. Given that, whatever pieces of it did survive, unable to be identified, were hauled away with the other pieces of the ruined complex. There is one bit of interesting trivia, however. According to former Port Authority art director Saul Wenegret, Ideogram was likely the most photographed work of art in the World Trade Center complex, mainly due to its usage in fashion shoots and adverts filmed in the complex. Though I guess given it no longer exists now, the Sphere likely has taken over as the most photographed piece of World Trade Center art, being the only one that survived nearly intact, that is. Moving inside the Twin Towers now, we have the first indoor public art piece, the World Trade Center Tapestry. With dimensions of 6.1 by 11 meters or 20 by 35 feet, this giant tapestry was installed inside the lobby of 2 World Trade Center, aka the South Tower. The tapestry was created by artists Joan Miró and Josep Royo. Initially, Miró was asked to create a tapestry for the complex, but refused as he had no experience with tapestry work. However, motivated to make a tapestry for a hospital which treated his daughter following an accident in Spain, he learned the skill from Royo, and the two went on to make several pieces of abstract tapestry art, including the one in the lobby of the South Tower. Made of wool and hemp, the tapestry weighed in at 4 tons. Completed in 1973, it was briefly displayed in the Grand Palais in Paris before being permanently installed in the Trade Center. If you visited the observation deck on the South Tower, chances are you will have seen it as you were on your way up. According to an article in the New York Times from 1981, the tapestry was cleaned twice a year and positioned in such a way that sunlight would not hit it directly and damage it. It was also sprayed with moth and insect repellent to keep it safe. Sadly, while that may have protected it from natural means of destruction, in the end, the tapestry was not immune to the total destruction of the complex, and it was destroyed when the South Tower collapsed. The tapestry was among one of the more well-known and most expensive works of art lost. Though Miró had since long passed, Joseph Royo, who still is alive, stated the following in regards to his loss and questions about possibly rebuilding it. He said, quote, "We will not rebuild it, because it would not be the same. When one falls in love for the first time, it is beautiful. A sweet memory remains. And that in the end is all that is left now of the tapestry as with where it once hung. Memories." The final work of public art that was on display inside of the World Trade Center was located in One World Trade, aka the North Tower. Created by artist Louise Nevelson, this piece was known as SkyGate, New York. Like all art in the Trade Center, Nevelson was commissioned to create the piece by the New York Port Authority. She had been commissioned a lot longer ago to make the piece, but had undergone many redesigns of it before creating the final one. What she ended up coming up with was a piece made of 35 different sculptures, placed together to create the image that is seen. Nevelson took inspiration while on a flight to New York from Washington as she looked out at the New York skyline. She described SkyGate as a night piece, which represented the windows of New York. At 5.2 by 9.8 meters or 17 by 32 feet, the black painted wooden relief was the largest work of art that Nevelson had ever created to date. SkyGate was also the last of the original works of art of the World Trade Center to be added to the complex, being completed and formally revealed in 1978. It stood there in the mezzanine of the North Tower, all the way until its destruction. Like the tapestry in the South Tower, it was lost when the North Tower collapsed, with no piece of it ever being recovered. Those were the original 6 works of art created for the World Trade Center. But I mentioned there were 7 pieces located in the complex. This piece, however, this final one, was not created because it was commissioned to be art people looked at and wondered. It was art created to serve as a memorial. This 7th and final, as well as the youngest work of art in the World Trade Center complex, was therefore less of a work of art and more of a reminder. On February 26, 1993, an explosion rocked the parking lot below the North Tower. The attack ended 6 lives and injured over 1,000. Following the repairs and rebuilding of the World Trade Center, rebuilding which sadly wouldn't even see a decade, a memorial was planned to be created to honor the 6 who perished. This resulted in the creation of the Memorial Fountain. Created by artist Ellen Zimmerman, the solid granite memorial rested on a 30 by 30 foot square located above the explosion point. Ellen talked about the piece in an article for the International Foundation of Art Research in 2002. She was one of a number of artists picked to design the memorial. She spoke about the struggles in creating the memorial. Quote, "The plaza was very large, and, unfortunately, the amount of money for the memorial was not up to the size of the plaza. Moreover, there were already so many large sculptures on the plaza itself, and trees, and those huge buildings, that it was ridiculous to think of competing with that." End quote. Her design, with inscriptions on the memorial, were meant to draw people in to read them and see what was there. Around the red granite disc in the middle of the fountain were the names of the 6 who died, and a small inscription. Because many of the victims were Hispanic, the inscription was both in English and Spanish. Trees and shrubs were placed around it as well as benches where people could sit and contemplate the events of the tragedy. The fountain was completed in 1995 on the 2-year anniversary of the attack, and remained in place until 2001. Until the second one. Ellen was in New York that day. Her studio was not too far from the Twin Towers. In her article about the memorial, she stated the following, quote, "One of the first things that came to my mind was that this memorial had been an art project for me. It meant a lot, but for me it wasn't a shrine the way it was to the families who lost loved ones in 1993. The press recently has been saying the same thing, that those families had a double loss. They lost their family members, and now they lost a memorial to them. What occurs to me is that you can build a lot of stone memorials, and if people are determined, they'll be destroyed along with everything else." End quote. The memorial was destroyed with the collapse of the towers. Miraculously though, one fragment of the memorial survived. The small piece bears part of the name of John D. Giovanni, one of the 6 who lost their lives that February day. Today that piece is on display at the September 11th Memorial Museum. A reminder about not only the destruction of September 11th, but the often forgotten loss of February 26, 1993.
Michael Jordan has finally given some substance to those reports of a comeback. For the first time, he has publicly suggested that he's looking forward to a return to the NBA. It's early this Tuesday morning, the 11th.
It's likely the true value of all the artwork lost that day will never truly be known. Arguably, the biggest work of art lost that day was the World Trade Center itself. Though some may have seen them as ugly or simplistic, that subtlety to them was what made the pair so fascinating. Even over 20 years on from their destruction, the Twin Towers continue to be both a means of remembrance and nostalgia. Remembrance for all that was lost that day, from the lives to the place of work and lifestyle, to the nostalgia of what that place was and the world before that time. Even today, the modern memorial that exists now, a true work of art in itself, reflects that sense of forever emptiness and void that exists from not just the lives lost that day, but of the two beloved towers that once filled it. I remember myself when I saw the memorial for the first time back in 2015. It changes your perception of the whole event and makes you realize just how big the loss was that day. These two gargantuan towers that once proudly looked over New York, coming down so quickly and taking with them so many innocent lives. Of course, the towers and those 7 works of art at the end of the day are all just that, and their loss does not mean a great amount when compared to the human toll of the tragedy. But in my eyes, it is important that we also remember what was, as well as who was. The Sphere, for example, is a memorial today, but 20 years ago, it was just a work of art on display between the two awe-inspiring buildings. In the same way that the Twin Towers then were a symbol of America's economic might and power, today they are symbols of its darkest hour. Art can be born with one vision, but with time it can be forged into something that the artist never likely intended it to be. I doubt Minoru Yamasaki foresaw his towers becoming what they are today when he first designed them. And I guess that's the moral of the story. What you make today can take on a new meaning long after you are gone. It's down to history, though, to decide if that meaning will be remembered happily, or with the Twin Towers, remembered in memoriam. This has been a TTM Productions video, and thank you for watching.